Hi, I'm Jason with MathTutorDVD.com, and today we're going to learn in the pre-algebra tutor about the concept of the least common multiple. Now, I know that you probably just got done watching the section on the greatest common factor, and in your book, in your classroom, you probably learned greatest common factor and least common multiple really close at the same time. So I wanted to break it up into two separate sections so you had everything separate so you wouldn't get confused, because these concepts are, at first they seem similar. They really are quite different, and they're used for different things later on. But now when you just learn both of them, I mean, they both involve list of numbers, they both involve picking something common to two lists, so they sort of seem like the same thing. In the greatest common factor, we were listing the factors of a number and picking the largest one common to both lists. That's what we did then. Now, in the least common multiple, you have to pick apart the words. Remember how we learned how to write the multiples of a number? We're going to practice that here. We write the multiples of number one that we have. We write the multiples of the other number that we have. And then we just look for the least, the common number that's common to both of these lists that happens to be the smallest. All right, now, we talked in the last section that greatest common factor was going to be used a lot for simplifying algebra expressions. Least common multiple is used all the time also. Specifically, it's used when we deal with fractions, finding the common denominator. We're going to get into that later, but you'll find that your skills that you develop here with least common multiple are going to come into play, especially when we start dealing with fractions. So let's go into it. What is the least common multiple? I've already given you sort of an overview. The least common multiple. And to this day, I have to just read the words and think about what it's telling me to understand what it's telling you. So what we do is we list the multiples of two or more numbers, and we pick the smallest number, so this is the smallest number, common to both lists, in other words. So really, rather than just talk about this all day, I think the easiest thing to do is just to go into to do some examples. So let's say we have the numbers 1 and 3, and we wanted to find the least common multiple. The way to do that is we write two different lists of numbers. First, we write the multiples of the number 1, and we already learned how to do this in a previous section. So if you have forgotten, go back and watch that section. But the way we do that, the multiples of the number 1 are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ... You can keep going on and on. The multiples of the number 3 are 0, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, ... So what you're doing here when you write the multiples is you're basically counting by the number. If you were finding the multiples of the number 2, it would be 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. If you were finding the multiples of 5, it would be 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, like that. Here we're just writing the multiples. Basically, we're counting by the number, and then all we do is we look at our list and we say, what is the smallest number common to both of these lists? The smallest number common to both of these lists, other than the number 0. We're never going to pick the number 0. And so we look here and we say, well, this is the smallest number common to both of those lists, other than the number 0. We never pick the number 0. So the least common multiple is 3. That's it. That's really all you do. In some ways, it's actually easier than finding the greatest common factor, but it just depends on the individual student. Okay, let's do some more. I think you'll get the hang of it. What about 2 and 6? Well, we would write the multiples of the number 2 as counting by 2, starting with 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, ... You can keep going on and on. Multiples of the number 6, 0, 6, 12, 18, ... You can keep on going. Now you look at both of these lists and you say, well, other than 0, what is the least number, the smallest number common to both? 6 is the smallest number common to both. So the least common multiple is 6. The least common multiple is 6. All right, what about 3 and 5? Well, to find the multiples of 3, you count by 3's. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, dot, dot, dot. Keep on going if you want to. 5, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, dot, dot, dot. And then you look and see what's the smallest number common to both. And you look here, none of this is common. The smallest one common is really 15. That's common to both lists. So the least common multiple is 15. And this is really, really handy later on when we start simplifying fractions and finding the common denominator. Let's go ahead and find the least common multiple of the numbers 4 and 6. So we'll have, for the number 4, we'll have 0, counting by 4s. 4, 8, 12, 16, dot, dot, dot. So I'll put dot, dot, dot there just to tell you that it goes on forever. Number 6. Okay, what we're going to have for number 6, we'll have 0, 6, 12, 18, dot, dot, dot. You can keep on going. And we look for the smallest number common to both, which is 12. So the least common multiple is 12. All right, just going to give you a few more problems. The only difference between these problems, they're not really getting any harder, it's just that the numbers are getting bigger. So you're going to have more multiples, and you might have to look a little bit farther ahead. So an example of that is, let's look at 4 and 9, the numbers 4 and 9. So for the number 4, we're going to have 0, 4, 8, 12, just counting by 4s, 16, 20, let's stop there for now. For 9, the least common multiple, 0, 9, 18, 27, 36, because 9 times 4 is 36, 9 times 5 is 45. Okay, so we start looking. What is common? Well, none of these are common to anything here, so you might kind of give up, but then if you keep going after 20, so this is 4 times 5 is 20, 4 times 6 is 24, then you have 28, then you have 32, and you have 36, and you can keep on going. Now you start to see some overlap between the guys here. The smallest number common to both of these lists is 36. So the least common multiple is 36. Now I want to take a moment to point something out to you that I haven't done so far. What do I say here? If you have numbers like this, and you listing the multiples, and you find a number, many times you'll find the least common multiple will be, a relatively small number. Sometimes when you're trying to find the multiples where you're trying to list them all out, you may have to go on and on and on forever before you finally find one that intersects, so to speak, so that the two of these guys have a common number. In this case, we went so far that the least common multiple was pretty big. It was 36. Now notice, 9 times 4 is 36. 9 times 4 is 36. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, definitely do it with this technique and try to find the least common one, but sometimes you're going to end up going so far out that the only common multiple that you can find is just basically multiplying the two things together, and that can be the least common multiple, because 4 and 9 really don't share any symmetry. I mean, they really don't. That you can just sort of tell by looking at 4 and 9 that they're not going to play happy together. Like something like 4 and 6, you know that they're both even, they're probably going to have a nice least common multiple. But something like, 13 and 17, I mean, there's nothing really common between those, so you may have to go a pretty long ways. But eventually, you will never have to go any farther than if you just multiply them together, I guess is really what I'm trying to say. So you will always be able to find a least common multiple, even if it ends up being the product of these two guys. Let's go ahead and look at another one. And I think it'll illustrate that too. Let's say 6 and 10. So for the number 6, we just count by 6s. 0, 6, 12, 18, 24. Let's stop there for now. Number 10. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, dot, dot, dot. Okay. So we don't have anything in common so far, so we keep on going. After 24, adding 6 to it, we're going to have 30, then 36, then 42, and I'm going to have to kind of continue here. We're going to have 48, then we're going to have 54, and then we're finally going to get to 60, and at that point we'll notice that 60 is actually, even though it's such a big number, it is the smallest number common to both of these numbers. If you look through this list of numbers, none of these numbers are in this other list down here except for 60. And also notice, let me write least common multiple is 60. So that's the answer. But notice that 6 times 10 is 60. So this was one of those things where at first you might look at these and say, well, these are going to play nice together. I'm going to have a nice least common multiple. Well, you start writing it out and you start not finding anything. Eventually, you will hit a number that's common to both of these lists if you're doing it right. And if you have to go all that way out, you will eventually, if you don't find anything sooner, you will eventually find the number such that 6 times 10 gives you that number. So the least common multiple is always going to have an answer. Even if you have to go far enough out to find out what the answer is, it'll be the product of these two things. And that's why we're going to get into fractions in a minute. I'm keep telling you this because when we start finding a common denominator in fraction, sometimes the only common denominator we can find is if we just multiply the denominators together. Sometimes the only least common multiple we can find is by multiplying the numbers together. So this is going to come back again when we start talking about fractions. And that's really the only reason I'm mentioning it. All right, let's go ahead and do a couple more. Instead of 2 numbers, what if we had 3 numbers? 1, 2, and 3. Well, you do it exactly the same way. For the number 1, we just count by ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ... For the number 2, we count by 2. 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, ... For the number 3, we count by 3. 0, 3, 6, 9, 12, ... Whoops, that's 15 really, ... And we look for what is common. Okay, 1 is not common, 2 is not common, 3 is not, because 3 is not in this list. 4 is common here, but not in this one. 5 is not common, but 6 is common. And if you look at both of those lists, you'll find out that the least common multiple is 6. So the least common multiple is 6. And that's the answer. Now also notice that 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. So in this case, it turned out the same sort of thing. I'm not trying to tell you to always multiply these numbers together, because sometimes you'll find a least common multiple that's smaller than that. Like in some of these beginning problems, we were able to find a really small least common multiple. But sometimes you'll have to go far enough out where the only multiple you're going to find that's common is going to be when you multiply them all together, like this. And that's a bulletproof way to find a common denominator with a fraction. We're going to talk about that a little bit later when we start talking about common denominators. If you can't find any other common denominator, you can always multiply the denominators together to get something that's common to both. That's the only reason I'm mentioning this stuff here, because we're going to use this when we start talking about fractions. What about 4, 5, and 6? Actually, I want to do 10, 5, and 6. All right, so for 10, we have 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, ... Those are the multiples. For 5, we count by 5s. 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, ... And for 6, we count by 6s. So 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, and then 18, and that's 6 times 3, so 6 times 4 is 24, 6 times 5 is 30, 6 times 6 is 36, so we can just stop there. And we look at the numbers here. Now, 10, 20, they're not common, but 30 is common. You had to go out a little ways to find it. Whoops, got to go this way to find it, but it's the only one that's really common about 30, 30, and 30. It's common to all of those guys. So sometimes you have to go a little ways farther out, but when we were able to do that, we found the number common to all 3. Now notice if we multiply these numbers together, see 6 times 5 is 30, 30 times 10 is 300, so obviously we were able to find a least common multiple much smaller than the product of these guys is equal to 30. But if we were not, like in this case, if we weren't able to find anything, you're going to end up finding the least common multiple that's a product of all 3. Most of the time, with reasonably sized numbers, you'll be able to find a least common multiple that's relatively small. Sometimes you'll have to go out a ways. And if you get really stumped, like when you're simplifying a fraction or trying to find the common denominator of 2 fractions, we'll talk about that later, you might have to just multiply the denominators together to get your common denominator if you can't find anything else common to both of them as a common multiple. Okay, I'm Jason. I hope you've learned something in this section. We've tackled least common multiple. I've tried to tie it into something practical. I don't want to get into fractions and denominators here because really we need to take it one step at a time. But just know that whenever we get off into fractions later, we're going to be finding common denominators all the time. It's not hard. It's very easy, actually, once we get in there and work a lot of problems. But these skills here, they're really important. And eventually, see, right now we're writing lists, writing a lot of lists, but over time, you won't have to write lists to do this. You'll get so good at it that you'll just know what the least common multiple is, and that will come with practice. So practice your problems, work these problems again if you need to, stick with it, and all of these skills will help you become a better student, do better on your test, and give you more confidence when it comes to algebra.